Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and welcome to all of you new listeners. We're so excited to have you here. And if you have been here from the beginning, welcome back. We are so glad that you are tuning in and, staying true with the podcast. We have quite a few episodes, so make sure you go back and listen to any that you've missed. We've got some good, horrible humans out there. And make sure you're sharing this with all of your friends and family who like, good, wholesome, true crime stories. Or if they just like history, this could be a good option for them as well. But make sure you're also subscribed and that you're following me so you know when episodes come out, because like this week, it might come out late. Sorry, guys. I apologize. It's been a rough week at work, so I needed to kind of take a little break before I recorded this episode, but we're back on track and I'm happy to be here. Another thing, make sure you're sharing any suggestions that you have for me. So if there's anyone in history that you would like to hear about, please let me know. I want to talk about that person. So just send me a message. You can comment on this episode, or you can just message me on either Facebook or Instagram. Either way, send me your suggestions because I want to talk about someone you want to hear about. So share those with me. But today, we are going to talk about one of the most feared names in history, Attila the Hun. I even heard that a lot of historians would rank him second only to Hitler as far as horrible people in history. I personally think it was Hitler, Stalin, Attila, but that is beside the point. He is not great. Why is he so bad? Well, that's exactly why we're here. That's what we're going to talk about today. He was a leader of the Huns during the 5th century. He was a brutal warrior who terrorized the Roman Empire. He sacked cities and became known as the Scourge of God. That is quite the nickname. He was ruthless, cunning, and left a trail of destruction across Europe. But was he truly evil or just playing by the rules of his time? I don't know. That's a good question. Let's find out. So Attila was born around 406 AD. Although we actually don't really know his true birth date because records from the Hun people were not super clear. They didn't keep really great records. So this is the best guess that people have. So he was born around 406 AD. He was born into a world of war and shifting alliances, right in the heart of the Eurasian steppe. It's a vast, untamed land that stretches from modern-day Hungary all the way to Mongolia. So when I first looked up Attila, because he's a Hun, right? I was thinking of Mulan, and Mulan's in China, and the Huns are attacking China. But in this story, Attila is mostly in Europe. So the Huns actually originated somewhere near China. They think maybe in Mongolia. Again, the records were really rough back then. They're not really sure where they originated, but they slowly shifted to the west towards Europe. And it's been a long time coming that they're over here in Europe during the life of Attila. So just to be clear, the Huns, yes, are originated in Asia, near China, attack China, all of that. But eventually they shifted more towards Europe. So just to clear that up. So this world that Attila was born into was ruled by the strong, where survival meant mastering the art of war from the very moment you could walk. We've kind of talked about this time period a little bit. It was pretty harsh, and it was literally survival of the fittest. So it makes sense that since he could walk, he would have to know how to fight. So he was born, like I said, into the Hun tribe. The Huns were a nomadic people and moved across Eurasia's steppes. And they were feared mostly because of their horseback archery skills and their ability to strike really quickly. So they could come out of nowhere and like decimate your army and then just be gone. This is like a locust coming and just eating all of your crops, except it's your people and they are an army. So that's what they were kind of known for. So Attila was born into the ruling family of the Huns, with his uncle being the king, I'm going to butcher his name, and you guys know I'm really bad at names, King Rugilia, and his uncle led the Huns before Attila would take over. So Attila grew up with power, so he was part of the royal family, but he definitely was not pampered like a lot of royalty were. The Huns didn't believe in soft leaders. From a young age, he learned to ride horses before he could even properly run. He trained in archery and sword fighting and just basic survival skills. But don't think of him as just another wild nomad. Oh, no. He was actually very smart. He learned multiple languages and studied Roman tactics. Now, here's where things get a little interesting, is Attila actually spent part of his youth as a hostage in the Roman Empire. So Attila was a hostage of the Roman Empire during several of his teen years, possibly from around 420 to 430 AD-ish. So again, the timelines are a little rough because the records were not kept very well at all. So how did he become a hostage, you might ask? Well, we've kind of heard this before, but there were treaties where the Huns and the Western Roman Empire would trade young noblemen from both sides to keep as hostages to maintain peace. We've heard that before in one of our previous episodes, and it didn't end well. Well, this doesn't end well for the Romans, I will tell you that. Because instead of feeling really trapped while he was there, Attila saw this as an opportunity to study the Romans from the inside. He learned multiple military strategies. He learned all of their weaknesses. He learned all of their politics and saw firsthand how the empire was rotting from the inside. Yeah, this is getting near the end of the mighty Roman Empire. So he saw all the corruption, all the corrupt officials, all the divided leadership, and over-reliance on bribes to keep enemies at bay. So he was very aware of Rome's weaknesses. So by the time he returned to the Huns, he had gained very valuable insight on how Rome functioned, and this knowledge would later be used against him against them, and all of his future campaigns. So as a teenager, Attila watched the world around him crumble. Like I said, Rome was still ginormous and still very strong, but it was very weak. The whole empire, by the way, would fall in 476 AD. So in about 40 years-ish from the point that he was a teenager. So not very long. So corruption, infighting, and civil wars left it very vulnerable. And he knew that one day he would take advantage of all of these weaknesses. And when his uncle died, that moment finally arrived. So now that Attila is back amongst his people with all of this extra knowledge, Attila grew into a very fierce warrior. He fought in many raids that actually gained him a lot of respect throughout the tribes of the Hun. So the Hun was made up of a lot of different smaller tribes that eventually united under the Hun name, just so you know. So he had to impress quite a few different tribes to be able to show that he was going to be a good leader. So by the time his uncle Rugilia, I think that's how you say his name, died around 434 AD, he and his brother Bleda, again, I don't know how to say his name, Bleda, were the ones left in charge. Now, you heard me right. He ruled with his brother Belda. Now, have you ever heard of Belda the Hun? No? Yeah, good. Neither had I. Why might that be? I am sure you can probably guess, but that's spoilers, so we're going to continue. At first, the two of them ruled together and actually did pretty well. They were able to gain a lot of power and a lot of territory. First, they actually had a campaign against the Eastern Roman Empire in 441 to about 447 AD. Their specific target was the Byzantine Empire, which was Eastern Rome. And in 441 AD, Attila and Bleda, sorry, I just can't say his name, actually broke a peace treaty that they had with Rome and attacked the cities along the Danube River. Not river. Sorry, guys. Told you, it was a long week at work. I'm telling you. So they actually sacked Ceramum and Nasus, basically modern day Syria. Guys, it's a struggle. Serbia. Wow. So they raided these areas and other key fortresses. And in 443 AD, Attila used siege weapons like he learned from the Romans to do to breach the city's defenses. And the Byzantines were unable to stop them and basically signed a treaty to make them stop. It was called the Treaty of Antiochus in 447 AD and agreed to pay a massive tribute to the Huns. So basically, this is the beginning of like gang protection. You pay me and I will protect you. And so they started paying a monthly tribute to the Huns for protection. So the brothers were pretty successful and were able to gain territory and take over some of their enemies. But let's be honest, history does not favor, quote, co-rulers. And I have never, in all of my history studies, seen that working out well. Because we know how that ends up. Attila wasn't really the type to share power. Shocking. I know we did not see this coming. But before long, Bleda was out of the pictures. And most historians believe that he was actually assassinated by Attila. But there's no proof. Because again, the record keeping was not great. We just know that he suddenly passed away. And so now Attila was the sole ruler of the Huns. And with the Roman Empire in his sights, he was ready to release his reign of terror. And it was just beginning. Before we continue with his reign of terror, I want to bring up Attila's love life. It's important because, the love life of a horrible, awful destroyer of empires is important. So let's take a look at Attila. So I can't tell you why, actually, his love life is really important quite yet because of spoilers, but let's take a look at it. So we often don't actually think of Attila the Hun as a romantic figure. He wasn't exactly writing love letters or composing poetry, but like a lot of other rulers at the time, Attila's love life was more of a power alliance and, in some cases, revenge kind of situation where he would marry these ladies to gain more power or alliances. So Attila had multiple wives, which was pretty common among the Huns. Marriage for steppe rulers was a way to, like I said, secure alliances, strengthen their influence. But unlike some other monarchs who married for purely political reasons, Attila was actually known to be very possessive of his wives. So you could say he was a little more romantic than most arranged marriages were, but it could have just been possessive. It might not have been love. But one of the most infamous romantic moments in Attila's life came from a very unusual source. It was actually a Roman princess. So let me set the scene for you. It's the year 450 AD. A woman named, oh man, here we go again. Honoria? I think. Honoria? We'll go with Honoria. She was the sister of Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III and is stuck in a pretty desperate situation. She is being forced into a politically arranged marriage that she wants zero part of because, at the time, women were just a political tool that you could just sell off to the highest bidder. So that's kind of what was happening. So what did she do to try and get out of this situation? Well, she secretly sends a message to Attila. And along with her plea for help, she includes something very interesting. She includes a ring. Yeah, so whether or not Honoria meant this to be a proposal to Attila or not, or just a bribe of like, here, I have wealth, help me, Attila took it very seriously. So he took it like a proposal. And he immediately claimed her as his bride and demanded half of the Western Roman Empire as her dowry. Like, this girl, imagine this, is trying to get out of an arranged marriage, messages a guy like, hey, dude, come save me. I'll marry you. And so he comes and steals her and then is like, oh, by the way, you owe me half of the Western Roman Empire. Like, you should pay up. I want that. So obviously Rome refused. Valentinian III was furious, insisting that his sister had no right to make such an offer with her own self, ironically. But Attila, he wasn't the type to take rejection lightly. You did not reject Attila. This so-called engagement became his excuse to invade Gaul in 451 AD, leading to one of the bloodiest battles of his reign. Like 165,000 to 300,000 casualties, depending on the source that you look at. That's how many people died in this invasion of Gaul. So, was Honoria truly in love with Attila? Probably not. But this single act, one woman's desperate attempt to escape her own fate, almost changed the entire course of history. Can you imagine that? Just one woman being like, yeah, I don't want to marry this other guy. Almost altered all of history. Isn't that insane? So you never know. Decisions you're making now could affect all of the rest of history. So no pressure to make the right ones. Kidding. Now, for the rest of his love life, we actually have to pause here because, again, spoilers. I will tell you more about it later. So back to his reign of terror. So he invades Gaul. So we're going to look at some of the other things that he did. So when Attila actually took power, like I said, he didn't waste any time. And from that moment on, Attila was unstoppable. He launched a brutal invasion of Eastern European Empire, forcing them to pay him massive amounts of gold to keep the Huns from attacking. He required them, like I said, it was a protection payment, and it was incredibly high priced for what he was doing. But the gold was never enough. he actually kept coming back and demanding more and more. And if they didn't pay it, he would just sack the city. Why not? So Attila didn't actually just rely on brutal force. He actually used fear as a weapon. So before attacking a city, he would actually send messengers ahead to offer a simple choice. You can either surrender and pay me tribute, or face total destruction. And many cities, just because they were paralyzed by fear and didn't want to be destroyed, surrendered without fighting. No fighting, no killing. They immediately would surrender. Well, what about those who resisted? Well, they became the cautionary tales that made everyone so scared that they would just surrender. So stories spread of Attila impaling his enemies, piling up skulls outside of city walls, and using captured Roman generals as human torches. Yeah, sounds like a real pleasant person, right? So whether these stories are true or exaggerated, we're not sure, because again, records not kept well. But one thing is clear, fear did majority of the work for him, at least half of it. So I'm guessing that the stories of impaling and skulls and human torches was probably accurate, because that fear had to come from somewhere. So in 451 AD, like I mentioned, he invades Gaul. And if you're wondering where Gaul is, by the way, it's actually modern day France. So if that gives you a better idea of where he's actually attacking in the Roman Empire, it's modern day France. So with his army of Huns, it's an army of Huns, Ostrogoths, and Alans. Those Alans from the Barbie movie? You know what I'm talking about? Haha, just kidding. Anyways, and other barbarian allies, Attila actually launched an invasion of Gaul that pillaged cities along the way. So before he even got there, he was just destroying the cities. And his ultimate goal was actually to reach Orleans. But Roman general Flavius Attius was one of the last great Roman commanders, actually rallied an army of Romans, Visigoths, Burgundians, and Franks to stop him. So the French stepped up to help the Romans to stop the Huns. And this was the first time Attila was actually stopped. But he was not defeated. Don't worry. So after he invaded Gaul, the next battle that he would participate in would be called the Battle of Catalanian Plains. So it's the Battle of the Catalanian Plains in 451 AD. And it's one of history's greatest battles. So the armies consisted of Attila's army had 200,000 troops. That's possibly exaggerated, but it's probably pretty close. And the Huns used deadly horse archers and expert raiders as their fighters. And they also had heavy cavalry and foot soldiers. And their strategy was basically hit and run attacks. So they would encircle and destroy enemies with a lot more mobility than the Roman Empire. Now, Attius's army, so the Roman army that they were coming up against, had 150,000 troops, which again could also be exaggerated, but it's probably pretty close. The advantage that they had was they had disciplined infantry and cavalry, and had a lot of strong warriors that really hated the Huns. And they also had a lot of Germanic tribes supporting them that had a lot of skilled fighters. And basically their strategy in this battle was to hold the high ground and force Attila into a head-on battle. So Attila's strategy at first was to charge up the hill to try and get a strategic high ground, and the Visigoths and Romans fought fierce enough that it actually pushed Attila and his troops back. So during this battle, Theodoric, he was the king of the Visigoths, was killed in the chaos. They actually think he might have been trampled or speared during the battle. So the Visigoths lost their king in this battle. While the Huns got pushed back, Attila retreated all the way back to his camp and built a defensive wagon fort. I would love to see this wagon fort. I just picture them all like stacked on top of each other with wheels spinning while people are shooting at them. I don't know. So Attius and his allies actually surrounded Attila's camp and prepared for a final assault. But instead of attacking immediately, Attius actually let Attila retreat overnight. I think that's super interesting to me that he would let this happen, because some believe Attius wanted Attila alive to keep the balance of power between the Romans, Visigoths, and other tribes balanced. But I just find it so interesting. It kind of reminds me of what happened in World War II, where the Germans were literally about to defeat the Allies, had them cornered, and were like, you know what, we'll stop for a day. We've got time. And that gave the British enough time to come and rescue all of their troops, and actually ended up saving the day and giving them another chance to take back Europe. Like, that's what this reminds me of, is like, oh no, we got this. You have a moment to retreat. We'll beat you eventually anyways. Well, the thing with that is they might have stopped Attila at that moment, but he would return the very next year to invade Italy, and it would not go well for Rome. So the long-term impact on this was the Visigoths lost their king, but they actually gained a little bit of power. Rome survived for now. And Attila's mystique of being unbeatable was shattered during this defeat, because they lost pretty soundly. So why was this battle important? Like I said, it was one of the last great battles of the Western Roman Empire. And if Attila had won, France might have actually fallen under the Hun rule. So France, aka Gaul at the time, could have turned out very differently. And it actually showed everyone in that time period that Attila was not invincible. But in 452 AD, Attila returned and invaded Italy. So after his defeat, or stalemate if you want to call it that, I would say more of a defeat, at the Battle of Cantalian Plains, Attila regrouped and set his sights on Italy, determined to take revenge on Western European Empire. His justification? He still considered Princess Honoria his rightful bride, and demanded her half of the empire. So he still, I told you, he doesn't let it go. He wants his prize for marrying this princess. And when Rome refused, he launched a devastating campaign into Italy. So in spring of 452 AD, Attila and his army crossed the Alps into the northern Italy, laying waste to literally everything in their path, burning everything to the ground. The first city that he attacked was Aquileia, and it fell pretty quickly. The Romans put up a fierce resistance, but after a long siege, Attila's forces breached the walls and completely destroyed the city. And according to legend, Aquileia was so thoroughly ruined that no one could even tell where the city had once stood. Like, even people who lived at the time couldn't tell you where it stood because it was so thoroughly destroyed. And then the next cities was Manila and Pavia. Now, Attila marched south, taking these two cities with very little resistance. And Milan, did I say? I don't know what I said. In Milan, it's Milan. He reportedly found a painting of the Roman emperors on a throne with the Hun kneeling before them. He was ticked. He was so mad. He ordered that this image be redrawn, making the Hun the rulers and the Romans kneeling in his symbol of ambition. He was confident that he was going to destroy the Roman Empire. Now, Attila actually planned to march on Rome itself, but he never got the chance to reach it. Despite his victories, Attila suddenly withdrew from Italy, and quite a few factors could have been at play for this. First, he actually met with Pope Leo I. Pope Leo intervened and had a meeting with Attila near the Po River. So what happened in this meeting is actually really unclear, but according to legends, Leo actually persuaded Attila to turn back, and some sources claim that he actually paid Attila off, while others suggest that Attila was actually afraid of divine retribution. So what actually happened in that meeting, no one really knows. But another factor could have been famine and disease. Italy had actually been suffering from a pretty severe famine at the time, and it made it really hard for Attila's army to actually find food to sustain them. So that could have played a factor in his retreat. But it's also suggested that disease, possibly plague, was spreading throughout his ranks, just decimating his army. So it was really weakening his forces. So some people think that could have been part of why he withdrew. But the other factor was that while Attila was in Italy, the Eastern Roman Empire, so the Byzantines, were preparing a counterattack. So he decided to turn back because Emperor Marcian had sent troops across the Danube to attack the Huns' homeland, forcing Attila to actually retreat and go back and defend his own land. So there was quite a few factors into why he might have turned around, but he actually got really close to Rome, and that would have destroyed the Roman Empire. But he was determined to make it back to Rome. It was like a "I'll be back" kind of situation. So Attila returned to his home base in Hungary and planned another campaign. Now, this invasion of Italy was Attila's last major campaign and one of the final blows before the fall of the Western Empire in 476 AD. So, like I said, Rome was on its last leg. It was limping along. It's getting close to imploding at this point. So, Attila, when he returned back to his own hometown, he started planning an invasion of Constantinople. Well, this plan never happened. And I'll talk about why in a second. But first, I want to talk about how he actually earned the nickname. And this nickname stuck and struck terror in the hearts of all of his enemies. His nickname was the Scourge of God. Now, this wasn't a title Attila actually gave himself because, we've had a lot of narcissistic leaders on here that give themselves titles. No, this was something given to him by the Romans themselves. Why? Because to them, Attila's invasions felt like divine punishment and a reckoning for their emperor's corruption and weakness. So they genuinely thought Attila and his men were a curse from God because of wickedness and weakness. And to be fair, Attila earned that reputation. He led massive raids across the eastern and western parts of the Roman Empire. He sacked over 100 cities and left entire regions just in ruins. His army moved really fast, striking like a storm and burning villages and leaving devastation in their wake. Survivors spoke of horrors that they witnessed, like whole families being slaughtered, towns erased from existence, and the enemy seemed unstoppable. In my research, I believe that they literally wiped out a whole people, like a group of people no longer exist. Like, what's a good example? Like, just like a whole minority, like an ethnic minority was wiped out by his actions because they didn't stop to think like these people deserve to exist. No, they just killed anyone in their past. So slaughtering whole families, they would kill whole tribes. So that group of people will no longer exist on the planet because of him. So it's pretty crazy. So when you hear the name Attila the Hun, what comes to your mind? A ruthless barbarian? A bloodthirsty warlord? The scourge of God? His reputation has echoed throughout history, turning him into one of the most feared figures of the ancient world. But was he really the savage monster that historians paint him to be? Or was he just a brilliant strategist who knew exactly how to use fear as a weapon? So let's not forget, Rome itself wasn't actually innocent. The Roman Empire had spent centuries doing exactly what Attila had done in conquering lands, enslaving people, and crushing anyone who stood in their way. The only real difference? Rome wrote the history books, while Attila became history's villain. Now, some historians argue that Attila wasn't just a bloodthirsty barbarian. He was actually a master strategist, and he knew how to exploit the weaknesses and negotiate when needed, and turned Rome's own politics against them. And that's where his knowledge of the Roman Empire was crucial for his success. And believe it or not, he could also be pretty merciful. Well, at least when it suited him. There are accounts of him sparing cities if they paid tribute. Like he kind of mentioned, or I mentioned before, he would warn them and say, if you pay tribute, then you'll be fine. So he seemed to stay true to that word. And some say he even ruled over his own people pretty fairly, rewarding loyalty and punishing betrayal. It was just mostly on the battlefield and towards his enemies that he was fierce and ferocious. Like, he didn't even live like a very lavish lifestyle. He lived in basically a wood cabin palace. It was just a big wood cabin. He didn't wear any lavish clothing. A lot of people who knew him outside of battle would say that he was kind of a decent, honorable, humble man, which doesn't reflect the brutality of his warrior side. So it's just kind of interesting to hear the different perspectives of what's deemed to be one of the worst leaders in history. Anyways, back to his story. So after his failed Italian campaign, where he turned around and after talking to the Pope, and people don't really know why he turned around, Attila returned to his palace, like I said, his big wood log cabin in the woods, where he was preparing for his next move. His plan was another invasion of Rome, but before he could do that, something really important happened. Now it's time to talk about Attila's final marriage, so back to his love life, because it is a fairly important thing, and it affects the rest of Attila's life. So, in 453 AD, Attila decided to take yet another wife. This would be his official third wife, and her name was Ildiaco, I think. She was believed to be a young Gothic woman, and unlike his previous marriages, this one would have the most impact on his life. That's why it's pretty noteworthy. So, according to legend, on the night of their wedding feast, Attila celebrated so hard. He was drinking and feasting well into the night, but by morning, something was wrong. His attendants actually found him dead in his bed. The official cause of his death? A massive nosebleed that choked him in his sleep. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds mighty suspicious. A man who survived countless battles, countless assassination attempts, and brutal warfare dies from a nosebleed? That seems a little too convenient, right? Yeah, seems that way to me. So here are some of the historians' theories. First, a lot of people believed that he was actually poisoned. Some believe that Attila's new bride, Ildiako, I think that's how you say her name, was more than just a bride. She was actually an assassin. So maybe she was part of a plot set up by the Romans, or maybe just a disgruntled member of Attila's own court to eliminate him before he could launch another campaign. We don't really know, but a lot of people suspect that she actually poisoned him because she would have had the closest proximity to do so. Some people believe that he was murdered by his own men. Attila's rule was absolute, but not everyone in his inner circle was happy. Some historians suggest that he may have been betrayed by his own generals or rivals who saw an opportunity to seize power, which is also pretty potentially likely because we've seen that happen in many other areas of the world for power. Or the other theory is it literally was a medical issue. So we'll play devil's advocate really quick. So maybe Attila did just die from internal bleeding. Some modern historians think that he may have actually had really high blood pressure and suffered from a ruptured artery, leading to the fatal nosebleed. Some think the heavy drinking combined with stress and past injuries could have pushed his body over the edge. Some even think he might have had a brain aneurysm, and that's why his nose had bled. No one really knows. All they know is he died of a nosebleed. That's what we know for sure. So, what do you think? How do you think he died? Do you think he was poisoned, killed, or was it natural? Let me know in the comments, because I honestly think his new wife probably killed him, but that's just my opinion. But we will never know for sure exactly what happened to him or what killed him. But I feel like it was a really anticlimactic way to die for someone who shook the Roman Empire and all of Europe to its core. Like, he died of a nosebleed and he struck fear in the hearts of everyone. It's just ironic, kind of like how Stalin died. No one wanted to help him. So it's crazy how all these scary people just die in such undramatic ways. Because, you'd think their lives would call for something dramatic, but it's always just something lame. So anyways, this marked the beginning of the end for the Hun Empire. Without Attila's leadership, the Huns quickly lost their power, and his once mighty empire faded very quickly into history. And unlike great rulers who were entombed in pyramids or massive mausoleums, Attila's burial was a closely guarded secret. His warriors supposedly buried him in a triple-layered coffin made of gold, silver, and iron, somewhere near a river somewhere. And here's the wild part. To keep the location secret, the men who actually buried him were all killed afterward. So no one knows where Attila's grave is. No one's found it even to this day. So genuinely no one knows where this man is buried because, they killed the people who buried him. So no one would know. It's just by a river somewhere. So if anyone ever finds it, I'll be pretty impressed. So, was Attila a hero or a villain? It really depends on who you ask. We don't have a total number of people who were actually killed because of the poor record keeping that existed at the time, but we do know that it was hundreds of thousands of people across Europe that died because of the choices of Attila. To the Romans, he was the ultimate nightmare, a brutal warlord who threatened the the whole empire's existence, and his harassment actually did contribute to the ultimate downfall of the Roman Empire. It was the first chink in their armor that eventually made them crumble. And to the Huns, he was legendary. He was a leader who brought them to their greatest heights. And to history, well, he remains one of the most infamous figures of all time. But maybe Attila wasn't just one or the other. Maybe he was exactly what history needed him to be. A force of destruction that shook the ancient world to its core. So what do you think? Was he a ruthless warlord, a strategic genius, or a bit of both? I want to know your thoughts. What do you think? Was he that horrible person? Let me know. I honestly think it is possible to be both of those things. I think it is possible to live a double life where in one arena of your life, you're this good person, while in the other, you can be a horrible, awful, ruthless killer. And we've seen that in a lot of our past episodes, that it is possible to live a dual life. And in history, it's never clear-cut, clean-cut. They are a monster or they're not a monster. They can be both Jekyll and Hyde. So I think Attila was both, but I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Either way, Attila is our horrible human in history for the week. So don't forget to like and subscribe and drop your suggestions for the next episode that you want to hear about. And I hope you enjoyed today's story about Attila the Hun. I know I learned a lot about him. I just knew he was terrible. I didn't know the details. So make sure you tune in next week, though, because next week is the week of love. So we will be talking about not a specific person. It's going to be a little bit different than our normal episodes, but this is going to be an event that took place on the Day of Love. We will be talking about the Valentine's Day Massacre. This story involves 1920s gangsters, so if you like that kind of stuff, you know this is going to be a good story. So make sure you tune in next week to Horrible Humans in History, and thanks again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed. See ya!